The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the kitchen as Michael brewed his coffee. It was a scene of perfect domesticity. The aroma of freshly ground beans filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of lavender from the garden outside. Michael cherished these quiet moments before the day began in earnest. He glanced at the clock, noting that he was running a bit late. Dunkin' Donuts was out of the question today. As he hurried down the hall, mug in hand, something caught his eye. He stopped abruptly, almost spilling his coffee. Just ahead, peeking around the corner, was his wife, Emily. Only her eyes and a strand of her long dark hair were visible, the rest of her body concealed by the wall. She stared at him with an intensity that was unsettling. "Geez, Lynn," Michael said, a nervous laugh escaping him. "You scared the shit out of me." Emily immediately popped out of view like a child caught playing a prank, and he heard her footsteps scurry off towards the living room. Michael stood there for a moment, perplexed. Emily wasn't the type to play practical jokes, especially not ones that bordered on creepy. She had always been the no-nonsense type, disliking anything remotely horror-related. He called after her, telling her he loved her and playfully calling her a weirdo. From somewhere in the house, he heard her laughing. It was a light, carefree sound that should have been comforting, but instead, it sent a shiver down his spine. He shook off the uneasy feeling and left for work, trying to focus on the tasks ahead. By lunchtime, the morning's incident was forgotten, buried under a pile of meetings and deadlines. When he returned home that evening, Emily was her usual self, smiling, kind, and considerate. She had made his favorite pasta dish for dinner, and they spent the evening watching a movie. The strange morning episode wasn't mentioned by either of them. 3 days later, Michael was jolted awake in the middle of the night. The digital clock beside the bed glowed 2:17 a.m. Thirsty, he made his way downstairs to get a drink. As he stood at the kitchen island, gulping down orange juice directly from the jug, he felt a sudden, sharp sensation of being watched. He lowered the jug and glanced around. At first, he saw nothing. But then he looked down. Emily was on the floor, peeking at him from the other side of the island. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and her eyes were wide and unblinking. Her lips were stretched into a grin that seemed too wide, too manic. Michael screamed. The sound echoed through the silent house, jarring and loud. Emily didn't flinch. Instead, she scuttled backwards on all fours, her hands and feet slapping against the tiles as she disappeared into the darkness of the hallway. Michael stood, frozen, the jug of orange juice still in his hand. His heart pounded in his chest, and he felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead. What the hell was that? He thought about going after her, but felt paralyzed by fear and confusion. Eventually, he forced himself to move, slowly making his way back upstairs. He hesitated at the bedroom door, listening for any sound of movement inside. Hearing nothing, he gently pushed the door open. Emily was in bed, lying on her side, her breathing deep and steady. She appeared to be asleep. Michael watched her for a while, half expecting her to jump out at him again. But she remained still, her face serene in the dim light. He climbed into bed, every nerve on edge, and lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to convince himself that he had imagined the whole thing. The next morning, he waited for Emily to come downstairs. When she finally appeared, he handed her a mug of coffee and kissed her cheek, trying to mask his anxiety. As they sat at the table, he decided to broach the subject. "What was that about last night?" he asked, keeping his tone light and casual. Emily frowned, looking genuinely puzzled. "What do you mean?" "You were peeking at me again, from behind the kitchen island. It was really creepy." She stared at him for a moment, then burst out laughing. The sound was so genuine, so full of amusement, that Michael found himself laughing along with her, despite his lingering unease. "You creep me out sometimes, you know that?" he said, shaking his head. She giggled and set her mug down, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You creep me out all the time. I guess we're even." They kissed, and for a moment, everything felt normal again. But as Michael drove to work, the image of Emily's wide, unblinking eyes kept replaying in his mind. He tried to rationalize it, Maybe she had been sleepwalking or playing a joke, but none of the explanations felt right. Something was off. Over the next few days, Michael began to notice Emily's strange behavior more frequently. He would catch her peeking from behind the couch or the curtains in the living room. Once, he even found her inside her grandmother's old trunk at the foot of their bed, the lid propped open just enough for her to watch him with one eye. Each time, her grin seemed a little wider, her eyes a little darker. The breaking point came one evening when Michael was watching TV. He felt that now familiar sensation of being watched and turned to see Emily peeking at him from the doorway. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and her eyes were wide and unblinking, reflecting the flickering light of the television. "Emily, this has to stop," he said, his voice trembling. "It's not funny anymore." She didn't respond. Instead, she slowly closed the door, her face disappearing into the shadows. Michael sat there, stunned and terrified. He knew he had to do something, but he didn't know what. The woman he loved was turning into something he couldn't understand, and it was driving him to the edge of sanity. The next morning, Michael resolved to talk to her again. He found her in the kitchen, making breakfast as if nothing had happened. He took a deep breath and approached her. "Emily, we need to talk about what's been going on," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. She looked up at him with a smile. "What do you mean?" "This peeking thing. It's really freaking me out. Why are you doing it?" Her smile faltered for a moment, and she looked genuinely confused. "I don't know what you're talking about, Michael. I haven't been doing anything." Michael felt a surge of frustration and fear. Was she lying to him? Or did she really not remember? He decided to try a different approach. "Can we go see a doctor? Just to make sure everything's okay?" Emily's expression hardened. "There's nothing wrong with me, Michael. Maybe you're the one who needs help." The accusation stung, and Michael didn't know how to respond. He watched as Emily finished making breakfast, her movements smooth and practiced. She seemed so normal, so composed, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Days turned into weeks, and Emily's behavior only grew more unsettling. Michael found himself constantly on edge, jumping at every shadow and sound. He started having nightmares about her, waking up in a cold sweat, convinced that she was watching him. The strain began to take a toll on his work, and his friends noticed the change in him. He was no longer the cheerful, easygoing guy they knew. One night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Michael made a decision. He needed to find out what was happening to his wife, even if it meant uncovering something he wasn't prepared to face. He would search their home for any clues, any signs of what might be causing her bizarre behavior. The following day, while Emily was out running errands, Michael went through the house with a fine-tooth comb. He started in the attic, sifting through old boxes and forgotten belongings. At first, he found nothing out of the ordinary, just dusty photo albums, old clothes, and bits of memorabilia. But then, tucked away in a corner behind a stack of boxes, he discovered something strange. There, hidden under a pile of old blankets, was a small, weathered book. Its cover was made of cracked leather, and the pages were yellowed with age. Michael opened it carefully, revealing rows of handwritten text in a language he couldn't decipher. Alongside the text were strange symbols and drawings that made his skin crawl. As he flipped through the pages, a passage caught his eye. It described entities that could mimic human forms, using them to infiltrate lives and feed off their victims' fear. Michael's heart pounded as he read the description, recognizing the behaviors it listed. Peeking from hidden places, unnatural movements, and an unsettling grin. He dropped the book, his mind reeling. Could it be true? Had something replaced his wife? The thought was terrifying, but it was the only explanation that made sense. He had to confront Emily, but he needed to be careful. Whatever was wearing her face was not his wife, and he couldn't predict how it would react. Michael put the book back in its hiding place and left the attic, his mind racing. He needed a plan. a way to expose the creature without putting himself in danger. As he descended the stairs, he heard the front door open. Emily was home. The time had come to face the truth. Michael steeled himself, determined to get answers. Emily was in the kitchen, humming softly as she unpacked groceries. Her movements were fluid, almost too perfect. He felt a pang of sadness, recalling the days when he believed he knew her every nuance. Now, she was a stranger. A sinister doppelganger. "Emily," he said, his voice trembling despite his resolve. "We need to talk." She looked up, her smile radiant and unnervingly flawless. "Of course, honey. What's on your mind?" He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I've been noticing strange things. The way you look at me from hidden places, the way you move. It's not normal. And I found something in the attic. A book with descriptions that match your behavior. What's happening to you?" Her smile faded, replaced by a mask of concern. "Michael, you're scaring me. What book are you talking about?" He felt a rush of frustration. She's playing dumb. "Don't lie to me, Emily. I know something's wrong. If you're in there, if there's any part of the real you left, tell me now." For a moment, her face flickered with an expression he recognized. Fear. But then it vanished, replaced by that wide, unsettling grin. "You're imagining things. Maybe you should see someone about this." He took a step back, realizing the danger he was in. "I'm not crazy, Emily. I know what I saw. I know you're not my wife." Her grin widened, stretching impossibly across her face. Her eyes darkened, becoming voids of endless depth. "Oh, Michael, you've figured it out. How clever of you." His heart raced as she took a step toward him. He stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. "Stay away from me." Emily, or whatever had taken her place, laughed, a sound that echoed with malevolence. "You can't escape, Michael. I'm everywhere. I'm everyone." Desperation fueled his actions. He grabbed a kitchen knife, brandishing it in front of him. "I'll find a way. I'll get my wife back." The creature tilted its head, a mockery of curiosity. "Your wife is gone, Michael, but I can still be her for you." With a scream of rage and terror, Michael lunged at the entity. It moved with inhuman speed, dodging his attack effortlessly. He crashed into the table, the knife clattering to the floor. In an instant, it was on him, pinning him down with supernatural strength. "Let me show you," it whispered, its face inches from his. Michael's vision blurred, darkness creeping in from the edges. He fought to stay conscious, but the creature's grip tightened, and his world went black. Michael awoke in his bed, drenched in sweat. His body ached, and his mind felt foggy. Was it all a nightmare? He glanced around, his heart sinking as he realized he was alone. The house was eerily quiet. Did I really face that thing? He rubbed his temples, trying to piece together his fragmented memories. The book in the attic. Emily's transformation. It was all too real to be a dream. He had to get out. He had to escape before it came back. Michael stumbled out of bed, throwing on clothes haphazardly. He grabbed his keys and rushed out the door, not daring to look back. The drive was a blur. He didn't know where he was going, only that he needed to put as much distance between himself and that house as possible. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the road. He felt a chill run down his spine, a constant sense of being watched. After what felt like hours, he found himself in a small town. Exhausted, he checked into a motel, praying for a night of undisturbed sleep. The room was shabby, but it offered a sense of safety he hadn't felt in weeks. He collapsed onto the bed, letting the tension drain from his body. The next morning, Michael woke to a sense of dread. He knew he couldn't stay hidden forever. He needed answers, a way to fight back. He picked up his phone and called his best friend David. "Hey man, it's Michael. I need to talk to you. It's urgent." David's voice was filled with concern. "Michael, where have you been? We've been worried sick. What's going on?" Michael hesitated, wondering how to explain the insanity of the past weeks. "I need you to trust me. Can we meet somewhere? It's about Emily." There was a pause on the other end. "All right. There's a diner a few miles from where I live. Meet me there in an hour." Michael agreed, feeling a glimmer of hope. Maybe David could help him unravel this nightmare. The diner was a typical roadside joint, filled with the smell of fried food and the hum of conversation. Michael spotted David in a corner booth and rushed over, relief washing over him at the sight of his friend's familiar face. "Michael, you look like hell," David said, concern etched in his features. "What's going on?" Michael took a deep breath and recounted everything. The strange behavior, the book, the creature. David listened intently, his expression shifting from disbelief to horror. "That's insane," David said when Michael finished. "But I believe you. We need to find out what that book says. Maybe it has a way to stop this thing." Michael nodded, grateful for his friend's support. "I left it in the attic. We'll have to go back." David hesitated, then nodded. "All right. We'll go together. But we need to be prepared." They spent the rest of the day gathering supplies, flashlights, weapons, anything that might help them confront the entity. As night fell, they drove back to Michael's house, steeling themselves for the encounter ahead. The house loomed ominously in the darkness, its windows like empty eyes. Michael's heart pounded as they approached, but David's presence gave him strength. They entered quietly, making their way to the attic. The book was where Michael had left it. He opened it to the page with the descriptions, his hands shaking. "Here," he whispered, pointing to a passage. "It says the only way to banish the entity is to confront it with the truth." "What does that mean?" David asked, his voice tense. "I don't know," Michael admitted. "But we have to try." Suddenly, the air grew cold, and the shadows in the attic seemed to thicken. Michael and David turned to see Emily, or the thing that wore her face, standing at the top of the stairs, its grin wider than ever. "Welcome home, Michael," it said, its voice dripping with malice. Michael clutched the book, his mind racing. The truth. I have to confront it with the truth. "You're not Emily," he said, his voice shaking. "I know you're not. You're just a parasite, feeding off my fear." The creature laughed, a sound that sent chills down their spines. "And what will you do about it?" Michael's grip tightened on the book. "I won't let you control me anymore." The creature hissed, its form flickering. Michael stepped forward, holding the book out like a shield. "You don't belong here. This is my home, and I will take it back." David raised his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. The creature recoiled, its grin faltering. "You can't get rid of me," it snarled. "I am a part of you now." "No," Michael said firmly. "You're a lie, and lies can't stand the light of truth." With a final, guttural scream, the creature dissolved into shadows, disappearing into the ether. The room seemed to lighten, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. Michael and David stood in stunned silence, the reality of what they'd just experienced sinking in. "Is it over?" David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Michael nodded slowly. "I think so." Weeks passed, and Michael gradually rebuilt his life. He moved to a new town, hoping to leave the horrors behind. One evening, as he settled into his new home, he glanced out the window and froze. Across the street, a new neighbor was moving in. She turned and looked directly at him. A wide, unsettling grin spreading across her face. It was Emily. His heart pounded in his chest as she raised a hand, waving slowly. Michael backed away from the window, terror clawing at his insides. He had escaped the house, but the nightmare had followed him.